It was a cold, gray morning, and the chill seemed to seep into my bones. I had just returned from the early shift at work, exhausted but ready to settle in with a cup of coffee and catch up on some reading. Our son, Michael, was still asleep, and Lisa had left for her shift at the restaurant where she worked as a manager. As I entered the kitchen, the sight of Michael's tablet lying on the counter caught my eye. He had been using it to play games the night before, and I had forgotten to put it away. I picked it up to return it to his room, but something on the screen made me stop. There they were, Lisa and Tom. The images were clear, taken in what looked like a professional kitchen. Lisa's arms were wrapped around Tom, their faces close in a way that spoke of intimacy and affection. My heart pounded as I swiped through the photos. The date and time stamps showed these weren't old pictures, they were taken recently. I felt my world tilt. Michael wandered into the kitchen, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "Dad, what are you doing?" I quickly shut the tablet, masking my shock with a forced smile. "Just putting this away, buddy. You should get dressed for school." He nodded and trudged off to his room, leaving me alone with the crushing weight of the betrayal that had just been laid bare before me. My mind raced as I sat down at the kitchen table. How could Lisa do this? How could she be so careless with our family? The questions spun around in my head, each one more painful than the last. I was overwhelmed by a mix of anger, sadness, and confusion. Taking a deep breath, I knew I had to act carefully. I couldn't let on to Lisa or anyone else that I had discovered the affair. I needed to confirm what I had seen and figure out my next steps. The images alone were damning, but I needed to know more about Tom, about their relationship, and about how long this had been going on. I decided to do what any responsible husband would do: investigate. For the next few days, I kept my distance from Lisa. Observing her behavior closely, I noted her late arrival home, the secretive phone calls, and the way she seemed to avoid eye contact when I was around. Each piece of evidence seemed to fit together perfectly, confirming my worst fears. One day, I decided to visit Tom's restaurant, the place where these images had been taken. I told Lisa I was going to run some errands, using the excuse of picking up supplies for Michael's school project. The restaurant was bustling with activity when I arrived. The chef, Tom, was at the center of it all, exuding confidence as he moved through the kitchen. Watching him interact with his staff, I couldn't help but feel a surge of anger. This man had come into my life, into my family, and shattered everything. I wanted to confront him right then and there, but I knew that would only make things messier. Instead, I observed and gathered information. Tom was as charming as he was skilled. It was clear that he had a way with people, and he had managed to win over everyone at the restaurant. But I knew his charm was a facade, a mask he wore to hide the truth of his actions. Returning home, I was more determined than ever to find a way to deal with this betrayal. I began planning my next move, knowing that I needed to be strategic. I would expose the affair, but I had to do it in a way that would hit them both where it hurt the most. Little did I know, my chance to strike would come sooner than I expected. Tom was hosting a major media event at the restaurant, an opportunity to showcase his culinary talents and gain recognition. It was the perfect stage for me to reveal the truth. And so, with a steely resolve, I prepared to make my move. I would use the media exposure to my advantage, ensuring that Tom and Lisa faced the full consequences of their actions. My plan was set, and there was no turning back. The truth would come out, and with it, the downfall of everything Lisa and Tom had built. The days leading up to the event felt like a slow march toward some inevitable explosion. I tried to keep things normal at home, acting like nothing was wrong. Lisa didn't seem to notice the shift, or maybe she was too wrapped up in her own world to care. Every time I saw her texting on her phone, my stomach twisted in knots. I knew exactly who she was messaging. At night, as she lay beside me in bed, I couldn't help but wonder how she could lie so easily. Her breathing was steady, peaceful even while my mind was racing. I had a plan, but the weight of what I was about to do sat heavily on my chest. There would be no going back after this. Tom's big event was only a few days away. The restaurant had been promoting it for weeks. Local food critics, bloggers, and journalists were all expected to attend. It was the perfect opportunity for Tom to shine, and I was going to make sure it ended in disaster. I spent hours in my office at home, emailing and calling journalists under the guise of an anonymous tip. I played the part of a concerned insider, someone with juicy information about Tom's personal life that would turn the event into a scandal. It didn't take much convincing. The media loves a good story, especially when it involves a fall from grace. The day of the event finally arrived. I left the house early, telling Lisa I had work meetings to attend. She barely looked up from her phone as I left, engrossed in whatever conversation she was having with Tom. It stung, but the anger was a useful fuel for what I had to do. I drove to the restaurant with a mix of nervous energy and cold determination. The parking lot was already filling up with cars as I arrived. Photographers and reporters were setting up outside, excited to cover what they thought would be a celebration of Tom's culinary achievements. If only they knew. Inside, the restaurant was bustling with activity. Waitstaff moved quickly, setting up tables, polishing silverware, and prepping for the big night. The air was thick with the smell of roasting meats and fresh herbs. Tom's signature dishes were being plated in the kitchen, and the man himself was everywhere, giving orders, chatting with guests, and making sure everything was perfect. I stood in the back, unnoticed, waiting for the right moment. The journalists I'd tipped off were mingling, looking for their chance to ask Tom a few questions. I could see the excitement in their eyes. They were like sharks circling, sensing blood in the water. Then, it was time. I stepped forward, clearing my throat loudly enough to turn heads. The room seemed to pause, and for a brief second, I hesitated. But then I caught sight of Tom, standing there with that smug smile. And any doubt I had vanished. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, my voice cutting through the murmur of conversation. "Before we get into celebrating Tom's talents, there's something I think you all need to know." The room went silent. Every eye was on me. Tom's face twisted in confusion, but I could see the flicker of panic behind his eyes as he realized something was wrong. "I'm Josh," I continued, feeling the adrenaline surge through me. "Lisa's husband." A wave of whispers rippled through the crowd. Lisa, standing near the back, froze. Her face went pale, her hands shaking as she quickly tried to back away, but there was no escaping what was coming. "For the past several months," I said, raising my voice, "Tom and my wife have been having an affair. While I've been at home with our son, these two have been meeting behind my back, betraying everything we built." I pulled out my phone and tapped the screen. The images of Lisa and Tom, the ones Michael had found, were now on display for everyone to see. Journalists snapped photos, recording every second of the chaos that followed. Tom's confident facade crumbled in an instant. He stood there, speechless, as the media frenzy erupted around him. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions, and the room filled with the sounds of disbelief and outrage. Lisa was nowhere to be seen. She had disappeared into the crowd, too humiliated to face what she had done. I stayed just long enough to watch Tom's world fall apart, the media tearing into him like wolves. His reputation was ruined, his carefully crafted image destroyed in a single moment. I had done what I came to do. As I walked out of the restaurant, the cold evening air hit me, but I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no relief. Just a hollow emptiness where anger had once been. I had exposed them, yes, but what now? What was left of my life after the revenge had played out? The drive home was quiet, the streets dark and empty. When I pulled into the driveway, the house felt foreign, like I was returning to a place that no longer belonged to me. Inside, the silence was suffocating. Michael was already asleep, oblivious to the storm that had just torn through his parents' lives. I stood at the doorway of his room for a moment, watching him breathe, peaceful and unaware. In the stillness, I realized the gravity of what I had done. Lisa was gone, not just from the restaurant but from my life. There was no fixing this. Our marriage was over, and nothing could bring back what had been shattered. But at least now, the world knew the truth. And that, for better or worse, was all I had left. The morning after the public humiliation felt like waking up in a stranger's life. The house was eerily quiet, and for the first time in years, there was no sound of Lisa bustling around in the kitchen or talking on the phone. She hadn't come home last night. A part of me expected this, but seeing the empty space in our bed solidified the reality. Lisa was gone. I sat at the kitchen table, sipping cold coffee, trying to process what had happened. The images, the chaos, the look on Tom's face when I exposed him, it all played on a loop in my mind. I should have felt some sense of victory, but instead, all I felt was exhaustion. The kind that settles deep in your bones and makes everything else seem distant. My phone buzzed, breaking the silence. I picked it up, expecting more fallout from last night, but it was a text from Michael's school. Parent-teacher conferences were coming up, and they wanted to schedule a time. The mundane nature of the message felt jarring, like a reminder that life outside of this disaster continued, even if mine felt like it had come to a screeching halt. I had to keep it together for Michael. He didn't deserve to be caught in the middle of this mess. I checked the time, realizing I needed to get him ready for school. Walking into his room, I found him sitting on his bed, looking at me with wide eyes. "Where's Mom?" I wasn't ready for this conversation, but there was no avoiding it. I sat down next to him, forcing a calm I didn't feel. "Mom's going to be away for a while, buddy." "Why? Did you guys have a fight?" Kids are perceptive. They notice things even when you try to shield them from it. "It's complicated, but I'm going to take care of everything, okay? You don't need to worry." Michael nodded, but I could see the confusion and hurt in his eyes. "Will she come back?" I didn't have an answer for that. "We'll see, but for now, it's just you and me. We're going to figure things out together." He seemed to accept that. But as he got ready for school, I could see the weight of what I wasn't telling him settle on his shoulders. I hated that he had to go through this, that my revenge had left him in the crossfire. After dropping him off at school, I drove aimlessly for a while, not sure where to go or what to do next. Lisa hadn't called, hadn't texted. Part of me wanted to reach out, to have a conversation that wasn't fueled by anger or betrayal, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Eventually, I found myself parked outside a small diner. One I used to go to when Lisa and I were dating. I walked in, the bell above the door jingling, and slid into a booth in the corner. The waitress took my order, and as I stared out the window, I realized I had no idea what came next. I had been so focused on exposing them, on making sure the world saw what they had done, that I hadn't thought about the aftermath. My phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't the school or a concerned friend. It was one of the journalists from last night. They wanted to follow up, to get more details on the story. I didn't respond. I couldn't. The revenge had been executed, but now I had to live with the consequences. And that, I was starting to realize, was going to be far harder than I had imagined. It was late in the evening when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone and the last thing I wanted was company, but when I opened the door, there she was. Lisa. Her face was drawn, her eyes puffy and red from what I assumed had been hours of crying. She stood there on the porch, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her, clutching a duffel bag like it was the only thing tethering her to the ground. "Josh, can we talk?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. I didn't say anything at first. Part of me wanted to slam the door in her face, to tell her she didn't have the right to ask for anything from me. But another part of me, the part that remembered the life we'd built together, wanted answers. Wanted closure. So I stepped aside and let her in. She walked into the living room, her steps tentative, as if she were afraid the floor might give way beneath her. I followed, keeping my distance as she set her bag down and sank onto the couch. For a long time, we just sat there, the silence heavy between us. "I'm sorry," she finally said, her voice trembling. "I know that doesn't fix anything, but I need you to know that." I stared at her, searching for something. Regret, remorse, anything that might make this easier to swallow. "How long, Lisa?" Her shoulders slumped, and she looked down at her hands. "A few months. It started as just talking. He was going through some stuff, and so was I, and I don't know, Josh. I never meant for it to get this far." "That's not an excuse," I said, my voice cold. "You had a choice. You chose him. You chose to betray everything we had." Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't feel sympathy. "Not yet. I know. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even know if I deserve forgiveness. You don't." The words came out harsher than I intended, but I didn't take them back. She needed to hear the truth. We sat in silence again, the weight of everything that had happened pressing down on us. "What do you want, Lisa? Why are you here?" She wiped her eyes, trying to compose herself. "I don't know. I needed to see you. To talk. To explain, even though I know it doesn't change anything." I stood up, pacing the room, feeling the walls closing in around me. "You hurt me. You hurt Michael. I don't know how we come back from this." "I don't either," she admitted, her voice small. "But I'm willing to try if you are." Her words hung in the air, and for the first time, I felt the crushing weight of what had been lost. I had destroyed Tom's career, isolated Lisa from her friends, and exposed their affair for the world to see. But none of it had brought me the closure I thought it would. "I don't know if I can," I said quietly. You broke something, Lisa. And I don't know if it can be fixed. She didn't argue. She didn't beg. She just nodded, her face a mask of pain and acceptance. I understand. As I watched her sit there, vulnerable and broken, I realized that this was just the beginning. Revenge had its moment, but now, we had to face the wreckage. Whether we could salvage anything from it remained to be seen. The days that followed were a blur of awkwardness and tension. Lisa stayed at her sister's house, giving me space to think, but it was impossible to ignore the mess we were now living in. The media had latched onto the story, as I had anticipated, but the attention was far more intense than I'd prepared for. Every day, new headlines popped up online: celebrity chef scandal, a recipe for disaster, and marriage goes up in flames, infidelity and betrayal exposed. The stories seemed endless. What I hadn't considered was how far-reaching the consequences would be. Not just for Tom, but for me, for Michael, and for Lisa. I'd lit the match, and now the fire was spreading. Michael's school was the first to get wind of it. He came home one afternoon, throwing his backpack onto the floor with more force than usual. I looked up from the kitchen table, already knowing something was wrong. "They're talking about Mom," he said quietly, standing there with his arms crossed, his face a mask of anger and confusion. I tried to keep my voice steady. "What are they saying?" "Just stupid stuff. About what happened. About Tom." He spat the name like it left a bad taste in his mouth. "Why did you do that? Why did you make it all public?" I didn't have a good answer. The truth was, I had done it because I wanted everyone to see the pain I was in, to make Lisa and Tom feel the same humiliation I'd felt. But now, it was Michael who was suffering. "I'm sorry, buddy," I said, standing up and walking over to him. "I didn't think it would affect you like this. You didn't think about me at all," he shot back, his voice rising. "You just wanted to hurt them. But now everyone's talking about our family. Everyone knows." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. He was right. I had been so focused on my own pain, on my need for revenge, that I hadn't thought about how it would impact him. "I never wanted you to be caught up in this," I said softly. I was angry. I didn't think it through. Michael looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. "Yeah, well, I don't know what to tell people now. It sucks." I put a hand on his shoulder, but he shrugged it off and walked to his room. I stood there, staring at the closed door, realizing that I wasn't just dealing with the fallout of a broken marriage. I was dealing with a family that was splintering apart, and it was my own doing. Later that evening, I received a text from Lisa. "Can we talk?" I hesitated before responding. The last conversation we had was painful but necessary. This one felt like it would be more of the same. Still, I agreed to meet her the next day at a coffee shop near her sister's house. I didn't know what we were going to discuss, but I knew there was more to say. The next morning, I found myself sitting across from her in the cafe. She looked tired, worn down by everything that had happened. The sparkle that used to light up her eyes was gone, replaced by something far darker. "Thanks for meeting me," she said, her voice soft. I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. "What do you want to talk about?" She took a deep breath. I need to know where we stand. Are we going to try to fix this, or are we done?" I didn't answer right away. I wasn't sure how to. The anger was still there, simmering beneath the surface, but so was something else: fatigue. I was tired of being angry, tired of the drama, tired of feeling like I was stuck in a never-ending cycle of blame and betrayal. "I don't know," I admitted. "I'm still trying to figure it out." Lisa looked down at her hands, nodding. "I get it. I messed up. I betrayed you. But I don't want to lose everything, Josh. I don't want to lose our family." I stared at her, feeling the weight of her words. It was what I had wanted to hear, but now that she was saying it, I wasn't sure if it was enough. "I don't know if we can come back from this," I said finally. "I don't know if I can trust you again." She looked up at me, tears welling in her eyes. "Can we try, please?" There was a part of me that wanted to say yes, to agree to try and rebuild what we had. But another part, the part that had been broken by her betrayal, wasn't sure it was possible. "We'll see," I said quietly. "But it's going to take time." Lisa nodded, wiping her eyes. "I understand. I'll give you as much time as you need." As we sat there in the cafe, surrounded by the noise of people going about their daily lives, I realized that the road ahead wasn't going to be easy. But at least now, there was a chance, however small, that we could start to heal. The fallout from Tom's affair with Lisa was swift and brutal. The media attention that had initially been a slow burn exploded into a full-blown scandal. The restaurant he worked at, the one where he had built his reputation as a top-tier chef, released a statement distancing themselves from him. Within days, he had been fired, his career in ruins. I watched it all unfold from the sidelines, with a mix of satisfaction and unease. I had gotten exactly what I wanted, Tom's public humiliation and professional destruction, but now that it had happened, it didn't bring the closure I thought it would. One evening, about a week after the cafe meeting with Lisa, I got a call from an unknown number. I hesitated but picked it up anyway. Josh? The voice on the other end was unmistakable. Tom. My hand tightened around the phone, but I didn't say anything at first. What could he possibly want? I know you don't want to hear from me, Tom continued, his voice rough, like he hadn't slept in days. But I need to talk to you. Please, why should I listen to anything you have to say? I spat back, anger flaring up again. Because I've lost everything, and I need you to understand. I never meant for this to happen. I didn't set out to ruin your life. Or hers. I nearly laughed at the absurdity of his words. You didn't set out to ruin my life, but that's exactly what you did. I know, he said, his voice hollow. I know, and I'm sorry. But please, Josh, can we meet? Just once. I need to apologize to you. In person. The last thing I wanted was to meet with Tom, but something in his voice, maybe the desperation, or the fact that he had already lost so much, made me pause. Fine, I said through gritted teeth. One meeting. That's it. We arranged to meet at a bar on the outskirts of town. When I arrived, Tom was already there, sitting in a corner booth, nursing a drink. He looked terrible, like someone who had been through hell and back. His clothes were rumpled, his hair a mess, and there were deep bags under his eyes. When he saw me, he stood up, his hands shaking slightly as he extended one toward me. I didn't take it. Instead, I sat down across from him, waiting for him to speak. I deserve that, he said, lowering his hand. I deserve all of it. Get to the point, I said, my voice cold. Tom sighed, running a hand through his hair. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't expect you to forget what I did. But I want you to know, I'm sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I needed to say it. I stared at him, my emotions a tangled mess of anger, satisfaction, and something else I couldn't quite place. You've lost your job, your reputation. What more do you want? Nothing, he said quietly. I just wanted you to know that I regret it. Every single moment. There was a part of me that wanted to believe him, to think that he was truly sorry. But another part, the part that had been burned by his betrayal, wasn't ready to let go. I don't care if you regret it, I said, standing up. What's done is done. I left the bar without another word, feeling a strange sense of emptiness. I had gotten my revenge, but at what cost? After Tom's fall from grace, the cracks in Lisa's life began to widen. The scandal didn't just affect him. Lisa felt the full weight of it too. Our friends, many of whom we had known for years, began to distance themselves from her. There were fewer phone calls and no more invites to dinners or parties. Even the few friends who did stick around treated her differently. People whispered behind her back, their judgment hanging in the air like a fog she couldn't escape. Lisa tried to maintain a sense of normalcy. But the strain was obvious. One evening, she came to pick up Michael after staying at her sister's for a few days. She looked exhausted, like the weight of everything was finally catching up to her. We hadn't talked much since the cafe meeting, and the silence between us felt like it was growing deeper with each passing day. Hey, she said quietly as she stepped into the living room. I gave a nod, keeping my distance. I didn't want to give her the impression that things were suddenly okay between us. Because they weren't, not by a long shot. Michael bounded down the stairs, his face lighting up when he saw his mom. Hey, Mom, he called, giving her a quick hug. She smiled at him, but it was strained. Hey, kiddo, how was school? Fine, he said, shrugging. We had this thing today where we had to present a historical figure. I did mine on Martin Luther King Jr. That's great, Lisa said, trying to sound enthusiastic, but I could tell she wasn't all there. After Michael went back upstairs to grab his stuff, Lisa turned to me. Josh, I know I have no right to ask for anything right now, but I need to talk to you. I crossed my arms, bracing for whatever she was about to say. Go ahead. She hesitated, clearly choosing her words carefully. I've been thinking about everything, about what happened and what I've done. And I'm not sure how to fix it. I feel like I'm losing everything, and I don't know how to make it stop. I stared at her, my heart hardening. You're surprised? You had an affair. Lisa. With Tom, of all people. Did you really think everything would just go back to normal? She winced at my words, but I didn't back down. The anger was still too fresh. I didn't think it through, she admitted. I was lost. But now, it feels like I'm drowning. Everyone's pulling away from me, and I don't know how to deal with it. Part of me wanted to tell her that this was what she deserved. That she had made her bed, and now she had to lie in it. But there was another part of me, the part that had loved her once, that felt a flicker of sympathy. Watching her crumble under the weight of her own choices was a strange kind of punishment. One that I wasn't sure I wanted to witness anymore. Lisa, you're going to have to figure this out on your own, I said, my voice cold but steady. I can't help you. Not after what you did. Her shoulders sagged, and she nodded, as if she had expected that answer. I understand, she said softly. I don't know how to fix it. I didn't have an answer for her. As far as I was concerned, some things couldn't be fixed. When she left with Michael that evening, I couldn't shake the feeling that, for the first time in our entire relationship, Lisa was completely alone. And as much as I hated what she had done, I wondered if that isolation was truly what I wanted for her. In the weeks following our brief conversation, Lisa's isolation only deepened. She stopped reaching out to our old friends altogether. Her sister was her only real support, but even that seemed strained. I could tell by the way Lisa had to force a smile around Michael when she dropped him off at the house. The guilt of her choices weighed heavily on her. It wasn't long before she stopped coming by at all. Instead, she asked if I could pick Michael up from her sister's place, avoiding face-to-face contact with me altogether. I didn't complain, it made things easier. The less I had to see her, the less I had to be reminded of everything that had happened. But it also made me wonder what her life had become. One afternoon, after I had picked Michael up from school and was driving him back home, he broke the silence. Dad, is Mom okay? The question caught me off guard. What do you mean? She just seems different. She doesn't smile much anymore. And she doesn't really go out. Aunt Carol says she's been staying in her room a lot. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel, unsure of how to respond. Michael was right. Lisa wasn't the same person anymore, and I wasn't sure if she ever would be. The affair, the public scandal, the fallout, it had changed her in ways neither of us could have predicted. She's going through a tough time, Bud, I said finally. She made some mistakes, and now she's dealing with the consequences. Michael was quiet for a moment, processing what I had said. Do you think she's sorry? I glanced over at him, surprised by the question. I think she is, I admitted. But sometimes, being sorry isn't enough. He nodded slowly, staring out the window. I could tell he was struggling to make sense of everything. The cracks in our family, the distance between his parents, the whispers he heard at school, it was all too much for a kid his age to bear. That evening, after dropping him off at Lisa's sister's place, I found myself driving aimlessly through the city. My mind was a storm of conflicting emotions, anger, guilt, resentment, and something I hadn't felt in a while, pity. Pity for Lisa, for the situation she had put herself in, for the loneliness she was now trapped in. I ended up at the same bar where I had met Tom weeks earlier. The place was nearly empty. Just a few patrons scattered around, nursing their drinks. I sat at the bar, ordered a beer, and tried to quiet the noise in my head. As I stared at my drink, I realized that I had been so focused on punishing Lisa that I hadn't really thought about what came next. The revenge had been satisfying at first, but now? Now it felt hollow. The damage had been done, both to Lisa and to myself. I wasn't sure if I could ever forgive her, but I wasn't sure how long I could carry this weight either. As the bartender refilled my glass, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the mirror behind the bar. I barely recognized the man staring back at me. I had become someone I didn't like, a man consumed by bitterness, defined by someone else's betrayal. It was time to make a decision. I could continue down this path of anger and isolation, or I could try to find a way out. Maybe not forgiveness, but something close to it. For Michael's sake, if not for my own. As I left the bar that night, I wasn't sure what that decision would look like. But I knew that something had to change. For all of us. The days stretched on, and while the bitterness was still there, something inside me started to shift. It wasn't immediate, and it wasn't dramatic, but I could feel it, a growing exhaustion from the anger that had consumed me. The revenge had been satisfying at first, seeing Lisa and Tom's lives unravel, But now it felt like a heavy burden I was tired of carrying. I couldn't stop thinking about what Michael had said. "Do you think she's sorry?" That question stuck with me. I didn't want to feel sorry for Lisa, but I couldn't help it. Watching her become isolated, seeing her withdraw from life, it was starting to feel like too much. I wasn't sure what I had expected, but it wasn't what I had envisioned. One evening, as I sat at home after dropping Michael off, I found myself flipping through old photo albums. I hadn't touched them since the affair came to light, but there they were, gathering dust on the shelf. I opened one and found a picture of us from a trip to the Grand Canyon. We were both smiling, our arms around each other. It was from years ago before everything had fallen apart. I stared at the picture for a long time, the weight of the past pressing down on me. We had been happy once. Maybe not perfect, but happy. And now, everything was gone. But was it all Lisa's fault? I had to ask myself that question honestly. Yes, she had cheated, but maybe I had let things slip long before then. Our marriage had cracks in it long before Tom entered the picture. I closed the album and leaned back in my chair, feeling the weight of everything. I wasn't sure what came next, but I knew I couldn't keep holding on to the anger forever. A few days later, Lisa called me. It was the first time she'd reached out in weeks. I could hear the nervousness in her voice. "Josh, can we talk?" she asked. I hesitated. I didn't want to get into another argument, but something in her voice told me this conversation might be different. "Yeah," I said, "we can talk." We met at a coffee shop downtown, one that we used to go to before everything had gone wrong. The irony wasn't lost on me as I sat there, waiting for her. When she arrived, she looked nervous, her hands fidgeting as she sat down across from me. "Thanks for meeting me," she said quietly. I nodded, not sure what to say. The tension between us was thick, but for once, it didn't feel like the anger that had dominated our last few interactions. This felt different. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," Lisa started, her voice shaky. "About everything. About what I did, and what it cost. Not just me, but you, and Michael. I've been selfish, and I know that now. I wasn't thinking about the damage I was doing. She paused, taking a deep breath. "I wanted to say that I'm sorry." The words hung in the air between us, and for the first time, I felt like she meant them. "I know, sorry, doesn't fix anything," she continued, her eyes pleading with me. "But I need you to know that I understand now. I've lost so much. And I know it's because of what I did. I hurt you, and I hurt Michael, and I don't know how to make that right." I stared at her for a long moment, trying to process what she was saying. Part of me wanted to stay angry, to hold on to the rage that had fueled me for so long. But another part of me, the part that was tired, the part that was starting to realize how much I'd lost too, wanted to let go. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you. Lisa," I said finally, my voice quiet. "What you did, it broke something. In us, in me." She nodded, her eyes filling with tears. "I know," she whispered. "I know." We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of everything we had been through settling between us. There was no easy fix, no simple solution that would make everything go back to the way it was. Too much had happened for that. But maybe, just maybe, we could start to heal. Not together, but at least separately. "I think we need to figure out what's best for Michael," I said after a while. "Whatever happens between us, we have to make sure he's okay." Lisa wiped her eyes and nodded. "I agree. He's what matters most." We talked for a while longer, discussing how we could co-parent without making things harder on him. It wasn't an easy conversation, but it was the first time we had been able to talk about the future without the anger clouding everything. For the first time in a long time, it felt like we were moving forward, even if it wasn't together. As we left the coffee shop, I realized that I didn't hate her anymore. I didn't forgive her, not yet, but the hate was gone. In its place was something softer, an understanding that we were both human, both flawed, and both trying to figure out how to move on from the mess we had made. Maybe that was enough for now. The first few weeks after Lisa and I had our talk were surprisingly quiet. We were both trying to navigate this new reality, focusing on Michael and making sure he was okay. But no matter how hard we tried to shield him from the fallout, he wasn't immune to what was happening around him. Michael had always been a smart kid, too smart for his own good sometimes. He knew something was wrong, and it wasn't long before he started acting out. At first, it was small things. His grades started slipping, and he would spend more time in his room, shutting us out. But then, one night, everything came to a head. It was a Tuesday evening, and I was trying to help him with his homework. He had math problems spread out on the table in front of him, but he wasn't paying attention. His eyes were glazed over, staring at the paper but not really seeing it. Michael, come on, focus, I said, trying to keep my patience. I don't care about this stupid math, he muttered, not looking up. Hey, you're better than this, I said, trying to encourage him. You've always been good at math. He slammed his pencil down, his face suddenly red with frustration. Why does it matter, Dad? Why does any of this matter? I was taken aback by the anger in his voice. Michael, what's going on? He looked up at me, his eyes filled with tears. You and Mom aren't together anymore. Nothing is the same. Why should I care about any of this? My heart sank. I had known he was struggling, but I hadn't realized just how deeply it was affecting him. I pulled a chair next to him, trying to figure out what to say. Michael, I know things have been hard, I started, my voice gentle. But your mom and we both love you. That hasn't changed. He wiped at his eyes angrily, refusing to look at me. But everything else has. You're not even here half the time anymore. And when you are, it's like you're not even paying attention. You're always mad, or upset, or something. I felt a sharp pang of guilt. He was right. I hadn't been present for him, not the way I should have been. I had been so consumed by my own pain, by the anger and the betrayal, that I hadn't realized how much I was neglecting my son. I'm sorry, buddy, I said quietly. I haven't been a good dad lately. But I'm going to do better. I promise. He didn't say anything, but I could see the sadness in his eyes. It was clear that the damage was already done, and I wasn't sure how to fix it. A few days later, Lisa called me again. I hadn't heard much from her since our talk at the coffee shop. We'd both been trying to give each other space, but I could tell by the tone in her voice that this wasn't just another check-in about Michael. Josh, can we meet? I need to talk to you, she said, sounding more serious than usual. I agreed, and we met at the same coffee shop. When she walked in, I could see the weight she was carrying. She looked tired, like she hadn't slept much in days. I've been doing a lot of thinking, she said after we sat down. Her hands were folded in front of her, and she was avoiding eye contact. Okay, I said cautiously, not sure where this was going. She took a deep breath, finally looking up at me. I think it's time for me to move. Out of town, I mean. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I hadn't expected this. Move? What are you talking about? I need to start over, Josh, she said, her voice cracking. I've lost so much here. My friends, my reputation, everything. And it's not just about me. Michael is suffering because of all of this. I think maybe a fresh start somewhere else would be good for him. I could feel the anger rising in me again. You think taking him away from me is going to help? She shook her head quickly. No, that's not what I mean. I'm not trying to take him away from you. But I can't stay here. Every day I wake up, I'm reminded of what I did, of how badly I screwed up. I need a chance to rebuild, to figure out who I am again. I sat back in my chair, trying to wrap my head around what she was saying. Part of me understood where she was coming from. She had become a pariah in our community, and it wasn't like things were going to get easier for her anytime soon. But the idea of her leaving, of her taking Michael and moving somewhere far away, made me sick to my stomach. Where would you even go? I asked, my voice quieter now. I've been talking to my sister, she said. She lives in Denver, and she's offered to let us stay with her for a while. I just think it might be what Michael needs too, a new environment, a chance to get away from all this. I was silent for a moment, my mind racing. I hated the thought of losing Michael, of not being able to see him every day. But at the same time, I couldn't ignore how badly he was struggling here. I don't know, Lisa, I said finally. This is a lot to process. I know, she said, her voice soft. And I'm not making any decisions without talking to you first. I need you to think about it. I nodded, though the knot in my stomach told me this wasn't something I was ready to accept. Lisa's words echoed in my mind for days. The thought of her leaving town and taking Michael away from me was something I couldn't shake. I tried to focus on work, on the mundane tasks that kept me distracted from the chaos, but every time I looked at Michael, I saw the toll it was taking on him. The weight of our broken family was crushing him, and I felt powerless to stop it. One evening, after Michael had gone to bed, I sat alone in the living room. The house was too quiet, the kind of quiet that makes your thoughts louder than you want them to be. I couldn't stop thinking about what Lisa had said. A fresh start. I didn't want to admit it, but maybe she was right. Maybe getting away from this town, away from the constant reminders of our broken marriage, was what Michael needed, but the idea of letting them go? It felt like another betrayal, a final nail in the coffin of everything I had once believed we were. I grabbed a beer from the fridge and stared at the blank TV screen, my thoughts spiraling. What would it mean if I let her go? Would it be giving up on everything I had fought so hard for? Or was it accepting the reality that no matter how much revenge I had taken, no matter how much pain I had caused her and Tom, it wouldn't fix what was broken between us? I knew I had to talk to Michael. He deserved to know what was happening, what might be coming. The next morning, I sat him down at the kitchen table before school. He was still half asleep, his hair messy and his eyes bleary, but I couldn't wait any longer. "Michael, your mom and I need to talk to you about something," I said, my voice gentle but firm. He looked up at me, blinking away sleep. "What's going on?" "Your mom's been thinking about moving," I said slowly, watching his reaction. "She wants to go to Denver, to stay with your aunt for a while. She thinks it might be good for you to have a change of scenery." Michael's face went pale. "Move? What do you mean? Like, leave?" "Not permanently," I said quickly, trying to soften the blow. "Just for a while. She thinks it might help you get away from everything that's been going on here." He stared at me, his expression unreadable. "And what do you think?" I hesitated. I didn't want to lie to him. "I don't know. I think your mom might be right. But I don't want you to feel like you're being forced to go." Michael looked down at his hands, fidgeting with the edge of his shirt. "I don't know what I want, Dad. Everything's messed up." I felt a sharp pang in my chest, hearing those words come from my son. He was right. Everything was messed up, and I wasn't sure how to fix it. "Look, buddy, I know this is hard," I said, leaning forward to meet his eyes. "But whatever happens, we'll figure it out together, okay? I'm not going anywhere. You'll still see me all the time, no matter what." He nodded, but I could see the uncertainty in his eyes. This wasn't something a few reassuring words could fix. After he left for school, I sat alone at the table, my mind spinning. I needed to talk to Lisa again. We had to figure out what was best for Michael, not for us. If leaving was truly the best thing for him, I'd have to find a way to accept it, even if it meant losing them both. Later that evening, I called Lisa. We needed to have a real conversation, one where we put aside our own bitterness and focused on Michael. She agreed to meet me at the park near our house, a neutral ground where we could talk without the walls of our home pressing in on us. When I arrived, she was already sitting on a bench, looking out at the playground. There were kids playing, their laughter echoing in the warm evening air. It felt surreal, watching them live their carefree lives while ours was in pieces. I sat down next to her, and for a few moments, neither of us said anything. The silence stretched out, thick and heavy. Finally, I broke it. "I talked to Michael," I said quietly. "About the move." Lisa turned to me, her expression cautious. "What did he say?" "He's confused," I said, rubbing my hands together. "He doesn't know what to think. And honestly, neither do I." She nodded, looking down at her hands. "I know this isn't easy, Josh. But I really believe it could be good for him. For both of us." "And what about me?" I asked, the frustration bubbling up before I could stop it. "You're asking me to just let you take him away? To sit here while you start a new life somewhere else?" Lisa's eyes met mine, and for the first time in a long time, I saw real emotion there. "I'm not trying to take him from you. I swear, that's not what this is about. But everything here reminds me of what I did. Of how I messed everything up. I can't breathe here, Josh. I feel like I'm drowning." Her voice cracked, and for a moment, I saw the Lisa I had once loved. The woman who had been my partner. My friend, before everything fell apart. It was hard to reconcile that version of her with the one who had betrayed me. "I get that you're hurting," I said, my voice low. "But this isn't just about you, Lisa. It's about Michael. We need to do what's best for him." "I know," she said softly. "But I really think this move could be a fresh start for him, too. He's been struggling so much, Josh. His grades are slipping, and he's acting out. Maybe getting away from all of this, away from the tension between us, could help him heal." I wanted to argue, to tell her that staying here was the best thing for him, but deep down, I wasn't sure anymore. Michael had been caught in the crossfire of our broken marriage, and he was paying the price. "I don't want to lose him," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "You won't," she said, her tone sincere. "We'll figure out a way to make it work. You can visit whenever you want. He can come back for holidays and summers." I'm not trying to cut you out of his life, Josh. I leaned back on the bench, staring up at the sky. The sun was starting to set, casting a warm orange glow over the park. I didn't want this. I didn't want to let them go. But I couldn't ignore the truth anymore. Fine, I said, my heart heavy. If this is what you think is best for Michael, then I'll support it. But I'm going to hold you to your word, Lisa. I'm going to be in his life, no matter what. She nodded, tears welling in her eyes. Thank you, Josh. I know this is hard. But I think it's the right thing to do. We sat in silence for a while, the weight of the decision settling between us. It felt like the final chapter of our life together was closing, and I wasn't sure what came next. But for the first time in a long time, I wasn't filled with anger or resentment. Just a deep, aching sadness. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I stood up. We'll need to figure out the logistics, I said. School, visitation, all of it. We will, she agreed, standing up as well. We'll figure it out. I gave her a nod and turned to leave. But before I walked away, I looked back at her one last time. Take care of him, I said, my voice thick with emotion. I will, she promised, her eyes full of tears. I'll take care of him. I walked away from the park, my steps heavy, feeling the weight of everything that had happened over the past few months. The revenge, the anger, the betrayal, it had all led to this moment. And while I wasn't sure what the future held, I knew one thing for certain, I had to let go. Not of Michael, but of the past, of the hurt, of the need to punish Lisa for what she had done. It was time to focus on what really mattered, my son. And somehow, we would make this work. Even if it meant starting over, apart. The day they left for Denver, the house felt emptier than ever. The sound of the front door closing behind them seemed to echo through every room, filling the silence with an eerie finality. Michael had hugged me tightly before he left, his face pressed against my chest, his small body trembling. Promise me we'll see each other soon, he had whispered, his voice thick with emotion. I promise, I had said, holding him tighter than ever before. We'll see each other all the time, buddy. Lisa stood by the car, her eyes downcast, avoiding my gaze. There wasn't much left to say between us, not after all the pain and betrayal. We'd said everything that mattered. Now, it was about Michael. It always had been, really. I watched them drive away, the taillights disappearing down the street. And for the first time in months, I didn't feel the burning anger that had consumed me for so long. Instead, there was just an emptiness. A hollow space where my marriage, my family, had once been. But beneath that emptiness, there was something else, something unfamiliar, peace. The house was still mine, though it didn't feel like it at the moment. Every corner held memories, good ones, bad ones, everything in between. But those memories no longer had the same power over me. I could feel the grip of the past loosening, the need for revenge fading into something quieter, something I could live with. I walked through the house that day, room by room, deciding what needed to change. There was no reason to cling to the way things had been. It was time to make this space mine, to fill it with new memories and new possibilities. I took down the old photos and packed away the mementos of a life that no longer existed. It was painful but necessary. In the weeks that followed, I threw myself into work, focusing on projects that had been neglected during the chaos of the past year. It felt good to lose myself in something productive, something that didn't remind me of everything that had gone wrong. But it wasn't just work that filled my days. I started running again, something I hadn't done in years. I'd forgotten how good it felt, the rush of air in my lungs, the steady rhythm of my feet hitting the pavement. It was as if I was reclaiming a part of myself I hadn't known was missing. Michael called me every night. Sometimes he talked about school, about his new friends in Denver. Other times, he just wanted to hear my voice, to know that I was still there for him, even from miles away. Those calls were the highlight of my day, a reminder that even though things had changed, the bond between us hadn't been broken. He was still my son, and I was still his dad. One weekend, a month after they had left, I drove to Denver to visit. The moment I saw Michael's face light up when he saw me, I knew we were going to be okay. The time apart had given both of us space to heal. But it hadn't weakened the connection we shared. We spent the weekend exploring the city, eating at his favorite restaurants, and catching up on everything we'd missed. For those few days, it was like nothing had changed. We laughed, we talked, we were a family again, at least for a little while. When I drove back home, the road stretched out before me, endless and open. The sun was setting in the distance, painting the sky with hues of orange and pink. I couldn't help but think about how far I'd come since the day I found those photos. The anger, the need for revenge, the bitterness, it had all been a part of the process, but it wasn't the end. I had thought the only way to deal with the pain was to strike back, to make them hurt the way I had been hurt. But in the end, it hadn't been about revenge. It had been about letting go. Letting go of Lisa. Letting go of the life we had built together. Letting go of the idea that I could somehow fix everything by making her pay for what she had done. It wasn't easy. It never would be. But it was the only way forward. As the miles rolled by, I realized something important: I had survived. I had gone through the worst of it, and I had come out the other side. Maybe a little battered, a little bruised, but still standing. And that was something. Life would go on. Michael would grow up, and we would build new memories together. Lisa would move on with her life, and I would do the same. The past was behind us, where it belonged. And as for the future? It was wide open, full of possibilities I hadn't even begun to imagine. For the first time in a long time, I felt ready to face it.